Okay, so this is going to be a hopefully quick video on journaling, how it's beneficial, why I absolutely love journaling, why I've been doing it for a good chunk of my life, and why I decided to get back into it again. I was talking about it with a friend just yesterday, actually, and I'd been journaling for many years of my life. I had like 5 or 6 journals that are completely filled up, just kind of getting my ideas down on the paper, and it's helped me process a lot of what was going on inside my life. And there is a lot of research out there and a lot of positive opinions on journaling to show that it can be effective, such as positivepsychology.com saying that it can help you process events, thus improving your mental health. Healthline.com states that it can increase your self-awareness. Rochester.edu states that it can reduce your stress. And then Kaiser Permanente states that it can actually help your communication skills and also assist you with goal setting and achievement. But then when you start to look at the actual studies, it doesn't really match the intensity that a lot of these opinions can have about mental health. Like, you can take a look at all of these sources that I just listed out and say, oh, journaling is going to be this fantastic cure for what I have. And that may not be necessarily the case for you. There was one meta-analysis that was done. It looked at 68 different studies on journaling, and it showed that it really reduced symptoms by 5% when compared to a control group. Specifically, with anxiety symptoms, they were reduced by 9%, and then with PTSD symptoms, they were reduced by 6%, which is pretty significant when we come to study talk and analyzing the data. But overall, it's not that significant when we kind of see all of the positive comments about journaling that's out there. And I think the common denominator that impacts how effective journaling is for you in your specific circumstance is how you journal and what you journal about. But also too, just the process of journaling in general. Like, for instance, whenever I pick up a journal, I don't just kind of go out to the big box department store and just pick the first thing that I see off the shelf. I always want to find something that gives me a sense of calmness, but also really gets me in the zone. Like, for instance, when I was out just today trying to find a new journal, I found this one, which is by Karst. Obviously, I'm not being sponsored by them. I can't when I only have 56 subscribers to my channel. But this one, it was a little bit of money, but it feels much heavier than other journals that I've had, even though it's just a plain black journal. And the reason that it feels heavier is that the paper is made from stone. I have no idea how they do it, but it apparently is also waterproof. The feel of the journal in my hand is just very different than from traditional paper. And then the way that the pen writes on it too is so much smoother than, any other journal I've ever had. So that's the kind of experience I'm talking about. It kind of separates me from my normal life and then gets me in the zone when I really just want to get my thoughts down on paper and then start being able to process them. If it's your first time journaling too, it can be intimidating, I imagine, if you're not really sure what you're supposed to write about. Like, for instance, when I'm working with clients and I suggest journaling as an activity for them, they kind of start it, but then they stop really quickly because it just kind of either gets boring or it gets really difficult, or they kind of get this roadblock inside their head. This is how I view journaling. Journaling is a way that we practice putting language to our thoughts. I'm a firm believer that we don't think in the language that we grew up in. We think in something called mentalese, and that is just the images, the neurological chemicals, the signals being sent into your brain. That's literally how we think. And by using language, we have just learned growing up how to apply English words or whatever language you learned growing up to those thoughts and those ideas. It goes along the same lines that Lisa Feldman Berrett talks about in her books, How Emotions Are Made. We have this idea growing up that emotions are innate and there's those 7 universal emotions no matter what culture you're brought up in. But emotions are really constructed based on the society that we have when we're growing up in. We learn how to apply certain emotions to certain feelings inside of us based on the context that we're around. So even those emotions are just predictions of what we expect to happen based on whatever we're experiencing in our environment. So when we talk about how journaling can increase your self-awareness, it does that by helping you apply English terms to the feelings going on inside of you, going on with the thoughts inside your head. When we talk about increasing communication skills, it's literally increasing your ability to communicate the ideas inside your head. And then when we talk about goal setting, it helps you really see when you start journaling what the roadblocks are preventing you from achieving the things that you want to achieve. Like in DBT, we talk about the 4 kind of realms or ways that you can view a problem. If you can fix the problem, then you fix it. If you can't fix the problem, then you try to feel better about it. If you can't feel better about the problem, then you try to tolerate the problem with distress tolerance. And then if you can't tolerate the problem, then you're just stuck being miserable. We obviously don't want to get to that 4th stage. Once you get the chance to write down your ideas and your thoughts and you put them into English, then you get a chance to look at it from a bird's eye view and ask yourself, what is the problem that I'm trying to fix? And then you can ask yourself, can I solve that problem? You can even then write down what possible solutions that you have. And then you can write down whether they've worked or not. And if they haven't worked, you can kind of figure out why it was that solution didn't work for you. This is something called the Kolb's method, where you look at the problem, you look at the attempt that you made, you try to analyze why that attempt didn't work, and then you try to create a new solution based on that information, and then you conduct the experiment again, trying to solve the problem. So when it comes to journaling, if you're just starting out and you don't really know what to write each day or whatever it is that you're writing at the time, I tend to think of it in one of 3 zones. We are either trying to learn a skill, we're trying to vent, or we're trying to process our emotions. If we're trying to learn a skill, then we're really trying to essentially solve a problem by learning a skill. This is where we identify the problems going on in our lives, the goals we're trying to achieve, and figuring out how to solve those problems with the Kolb's method. You could start by writing down the goal you're trying to achieve, the attempts you've made trying to get to it, the things that have gotten into the way, and then you start to get into the analysis phase of figuring out why this didn't work for you. Whether you were feeling a certain way at that time, whether something wasn't there, a resource that you were trying to use at the time, and then seeing if that process makes you more confident in trying it again once you find a new solution. If you simply just want to vent, then you can just streamline and free write whatever the thoughts are that are coming through your head. Journaling, in a sense, becomes a separate person. You know, we can go over to a friend's house or go meet a friend for coffee and talk about our day and talk about the frustrations going on in our lives. And that in itself is very therapeutic because we're social beings. A journal can be the same way because you're telling your own personal thoughts to a journal with kind of less risk. You know, you're making yourself vulnerable to a thing that can't possibly share its information to someone else unless you give that book to them. And then if we're using the journal to process our emotions or process something that's going on inside our lives, you could just start by explaining, what am I feeling inside? Where am I feeling tense? Am I feeling tense in my shoulders? Am I feeling tense in my gut? Do I feel cold? Am I shaking in any way? What emotions can I label to those sensations? What are the events that had just happened? What are the events that are about to happen? Is there any similarity in there or any pattern that I notice? Something that's been going on inside my life. When we use journaling to manage stress, I think it's important, again, to distinct, like I talk about in a few of my videos, the difference between stress and anxiety. Anxiety is much more of a threat. There's a threat in front of you, or there's an anticipated threat coming in the future that you anticipate is going to harm you in some way. You could take the time to write down that perceived threat that's about to come up in time and ask yourself, what is the worst case scenario? And then try to argue if that worst case scenario is likely to happen. If there have been times where you worried about that fear in the past, but really never came to fruition. And then when it comes to stress, specifically, stress is change in our life. It is a demand that the environment puts on us to do, such as going to work every day, such as taking care of our family or cleaning the house. You can start to make realizations that the changes that are coming into your life, if they are becoming more and more frequent, are just going to become a normal routine of your life. And that the more you do those stressors, the more comfortable you are in doing them, the more skilled you are in performing those stressors, and the more of a routine it becomes. That in itself could change your routine in other aspects of your life. It could change the emotions that you feel in other aspects of your life. And ultimately, journaling is just a time for you to sit in your thoughts and being comfortable in letting your mind generate whatever thoughts are coming to your head. That is in itself a practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness being not only aware of our thoughts, but when we meditate, we learn to be comfortable with those thoughts that are flying through our head at 1,000,000 miles a second. So, needless to say, I think that's enough explaining about the journal. I'm getting ready to sit down and write my first entry in it.